I'm leaving you for my ex, my wife smirked after 15 years. I just nodded in silence. The next day, her lawyer called her, panicking. The estates, the accounts. What did you just do? Most people think that forensic auditing is just about sitting in a gray cubicle and crunching numbers on a spreadsheet. They think it is boring, predictable, and devoid of any real human emotion. They're entirely wrong. Forensic auditing is the study of human deception. It is the art of looking at a perfectly balanced ledger and knowing exactly where the lies are buried. It teaches you that people will always leave a trail, no matter how clever they think they are. My name is Nolan. I am 48 years old, recently retired from a very lucrative career in that exact field, and I am a man who appreciates structure, discipline, and absolute control over my environment. For 15 years, my environment included my wife, Stella. If I was the architect, carefully measuring every beam and securing every foundation, Stella was the hurricane. She was 44, vibrant, loud, and entirely addicted to drama. Stella was the kind of woman who treated a peaceful afternoon like a personal insult. If there was no conflict happening in her life, she would manufacture one. She would pick fights with the neighbors over where their sprinklers hit our driveway. She would return expensive meals at restaurants just to watch the waiters squirm. She thrived on the adrenaline of being the center of attention, whether that attention was positive or negative. When we first met in our late 20s, I mistook her chaos for passion. I was a quiet, methodical man, and she was a firecracker. Opposites attract, or so the terrible cliché goes. But over 15 years of marriage, that firecracker just became an exhausting hazard. I spent a decade and a half playing the role of the silent fixer. I was the one who quietly paid the late fees when she forgot to mail the property tax checks because she was too busy planning a lavish weekend trip. I was the one who smoothed things over with the country club board when she had a screaming match with the tennis instructor. I absorbed her chaos, neutralized it, and kept our lives moving forward. We had one daughter, Hazel. Hazel is 21 now, away at a state university, studying environmental science. Hazel is the only truly beautiful thing to come out of my marriage to Stella. From a very young age, Hazel realized that she had to be the peacekeeper. She watched me quietly dismantle her mother's emotional bombs, and she learned to navigate around Stella's volatile moods. I tried my best to shield Hazel from the worst of it, to provide a stable, boring, utterly reliable father figure to counteract the whirlwind that was her mother. For a long time, I thought that was just what marriage was. You make a vow, you accept the flaws, and you build a life around the unchangeable facts of your partner's personality. I thought I was being a good husband by managing her mess. I thought my patience was a virtue. But patience without boundaries is just masochism. And as I would eventually learn, absorbing someone else's toxic behavior does not cure them. It only teaches them that they can get away with murder. I was tired. I was so incredibly tired of being the adult in the room. But I did not leave. I stayed because of Hazel, and I stayed because I had built an empire of wealth that I was not about to let a hurricane destroy. To understand the absolute zero-mercy policy I eventually adopted, you have to understand what happened exactly 7 years ago. It was a crisp Tuesday morning in October. Hazel was 14, navigating her freshman year of high school. I was sitting at my home office desk, reviewing our quarterly bank statements, a habit from my profession that I never shook off. I noticed a discrepancy. It was not a small rounding error. It was a massive, gaping hole in our joint savings account. $60,000 had been withdrawn over the course of 3 months, transferred in increments just under the federal reporting limit to avoid triggering any automated alerts. Stella had done it. She had forged my signature on 2 internal transfer documents and bypassed the secondary authentication by intercepting the mail. When I confronted her, she did not apologize. She did not break down in tears of regret. Instead, she got defensive. She screamed that I was controlling, that it was her money too, and that she had invested it in a surefire business opportunity. It took me less than 3 hours to trace the wire transfers. The money had not gone into a mutual fund or a tech startup. It had gone directly into the LLC of a man named Preston. Preston was Stella's ex-boyfriend from her 20s. He was a smooth-talking, perpetually unemployed grifter who drove leased luxury cars and always had a new pitch for a pyramid scheme. Stella had secretly reconnected with him on social media and decided to fund his lifestyle under the guise of an investment. The $60,000 was gone, vaporized into bad debts, expensive dinners, and Preston's outstanding legal fees. Any normal man would have filed for divorce right then and there. I had the paperwork drafted by my attorney the very next morning. But then I looked at Hazel. She was 14, fragile, struggling with the social pressures of high school, and entirely dependent on the illusion of our stable family. A messy, public divorce over infidelity and financial fraud would have destroyed her world. Stella knew this. She weaponized my love for our daughter, crying that a broken home would ruin Hazel's future. So, I made a choice. I did not explode. I did not throw her out on the street. I sat down at my desk, used every forensic accounting trick I knew, and legally dismantled the remaining debt to save our home from the tax liens Preston's shady business was attracting. I paid the price for her betrayal in cold, hard cash. But something inside me died that week. The marriage was over. The love was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. I realized that Stella was not just a difficult wife, she was a catastrophic financial and emotional liability. I could not leave her yet, but I could absolutely protect myself. I did not yell. I did not punish her outwardly. Instead, I began to build a fortress. I spent the next 7 years quietly, meticulously restructuring our entire estate. I hired the best trust attorneys in the state. I created layers of holding companies, shell corporations, and blind trusts. I moved the title of our house, the bulk of my retirement funds, and every valuable asset we owned into an impenetrable legal structure. And the masterpiece of it all was a post-nuptial agreement. I buried it in a massive stack of mortgage refinancing documents when interest rates dropped. Stella, who hated reading anything longer than a text message, signed it without glancing at a single paragraph. She signed away her right to everything, completely unaware that she had just locked herself out of the castle. Fast forward to our 15th wedding anniversary. By this point, Hazel was safely out of the house and thriving at college. The invisible timer I had set 7 years ago was finally reaching zero. I just needed a catalyst. Stella provided it with spectacular theatricality. I booked a table at an upscale seafood restaurant downtown. It had heavy mahogany tables, dim lighting, and the kind of quiet atmosphere that practically demanded good manners. Stella wore an emerald green dress I had purchased for her 2 years prior. She looked beautiful, polished, and entirely restless. Throughout the appetizers, she was uncharacteristically quiet. She kept checking her phone, her leg bouncing under the table. When the main courses arrived, perfectly grilled salmon with a side of asparagus, she took a sip of her expensive white wine, set the glass down, and looked me dead in the eye. "I am going back to Preston," she said. Her voice was steady, practiced. She delivered the line like she was a soap opera actress reaching the climax of a season finale. "I have been seeing him for months. He is doing really well now, Nolan. He understands me in a way you never could. I want a divorce." She paused, leaning back in her chair, waiting for the explosion. She wanted me to raise my voice. She wanted a scene. She wanted to be the tragic heroine walking out on the oppressive, boring husband who could not handle her truth. Then, she delivered the final blow, her lips curling into a cruel little smirk. "Honestly, I never really loved you, Nolan. You were just safe. You were a paycheck." I looked at her. I did not feel a shred of heartbreak. I did not feel the sudden, crushing weight of betrayal. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. It was like carrying a 100-pound backpack for 15 years and finally being told I could put it down. I looked down at my plate. I picked up my silver fork, took a small, deliberate bite of the salmon, and chewed it slowly. It was seasoned perfectly. I swallowed, picked up my linen napkin, and gently dabbed the corners of my mouth. I looked back up at her. She was staring at me, her brow furrowed, visibly confused by the lack of shattered glass, and shouting, Okay, I said quietly. Her smirk faltered. Okay, that is all you have to say? I just told you I have been sleeping with my ex and I am leaving you, and you say okay. I heard you, Stella, I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. If that is what you want, you should go pack your things tonight. I signaled the waiter, paid the bill with a corporate card, and stood up. I held the door for her as we left the restaurant. The drive home was excruciatingly silent, but not for me. For Stella, the silence was maddening. She kept taking deep breaths, shifting in her leather seat, waiting for me to scream, to cry, to beg her to stay. I simply listened to the hum of the engine, my mind already running through the checklist of legal protocols I was about to initiate. She thought she had just dropped a nuclear bomb on my life. She had no idea she had just handed me the remote control to detonate hers. The front door had barely clicked shut behind us when Stella's performance shifted into high gear. Denied her public screaming match at the restaurant, she decided to turn the house into her personal stage. She stomped up the hardwood stairs, her heels striking the wood like hammer blows. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, and leaned against the marble island, listening. The sounds drifting down from the master bedroom were intentionally aggressive. Zippers being ripped open. Hangers clattering to the floor. Closet doors slamming so hard the pictures on the walls vibrated. Then came the phone call. She put her phone on speaker, maximizing the volume so I would be sure to hear it from downstairs. Hey, baby, she cooed, her voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that made my stomach turn. Hey, Preston's voice echoed through the house. It sounded exactly as I remembered from 7 years ago, overconfident, slightly raspy, the voice of a man who thought he was much smarter than he actually was. Did you tell the boring old man yet? Stella let out a loud, theatrical laugh. Oh, I told him. He just sat there like a robot. He didn't even have the spine to fight for me. I am packing a bag now. I will be at your place in an hour. Can't wait, babe. Your new life starts tonight, Preston said before hanging up. I took a slow sip of water. It was almost comical how perfectly they were playing into my hands. 30 minutes later, she appeared at the top of the stairs, dragging a massive, heavy suitcase behind her. She bumped it down each step, making as much noise as humanly possible. She reached the foyer. I walked out of the kitchen and stood in the hallway, my arms casually crossed over my chest. I wore a relaxed expression, betraying absolutely nothing. She grabbed her coat, threw it over her arm, and put her hand on the brass doorknob. She paused, looking over her shoulder at me. She needed a final parting shot. She needed to feel powerful. My lawyer will be calling you tomorrow, Nolan, she said, her eyes narrowing into a vindictive glare. Do not try to hide anything. I know exactly what we are worth. I will finally get half of everything. The house, the retirement accounts, the cars. All of it. I did not flinch. I did not correct her. I just looked at her, gave a very slight, polite nod, and said, "Have a safe ride, Stella." Her jaw clenched in sheer frustration. She yanked the front door open and dragged her suitcase out onto the porch. Through the glass panels, I watched the headlights of her Uber sweep across the driveway. The driver loaded her bag. She got into the back seat without looking back. The car shifted into gear. I stood completely still in the dark hallway, listening to the tires crunch over the gravel. I counted the seconds in my head. 10, 20, 30, 45 seconds. At 45 seconds, the sound of the engine faded completely into the distance, swallowed by the quiet suburban night. The house was empty. For the first time in 15 years, the air inside these walls did not feel thick with tension. The house felt like it was finally exhaling. The hurricane had passed. Now it was time for the architect to lock the doors. I turned away from the front door and walked down the hallway toward my study. The study was situated at the far end of the house, a room with dark oak paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and heavy velvet curtains. It was the one room in the house Stella never entered. She hated it. She said it smelled like old paper and boring secrets. She was right about the secrets. I locked the heavy wooden door behind me. The only light came from the small brass lamp on my massive oak desk. I walked over to the bookshelf on the far wall, reached behind a row of thick tax law encyclopedias, and triggered the hidden latch. The section of the shelf swung open smoothly, revealing a heavy, digital steel safe bolted directly into the foundation of the house. I punched in the 12-digit biometric passcode and pressed my thumb against the scanner. The heavy bolts clicked, and I pulled the steel door open. Inside, resting on the bottom shelf, was a black, fireproof lockbox. I pulled it out, set it on my desk, and unlocked it with a small silver key I kept on my person at all times. Inside the box was my masterpiece. It was a thick stack of legal documents, printed on heavy stock, archival paper. At the very top was the document that mattered most: the postnuptial agreement. I picked it up. I traced my fingers over the embossed seal of the notary public at the bottom of the last page. Next to it was Stella's signature, messy and rushed, signed 7 years ago on a Tuesday afternoon when she was in a hurry to get to a spa appointment. She had thought she was signing a routine bank waiver to lower our mortgage rate. She had not read a single word. I flipped directly to page 14. Section 4, subsection 9. I had internally dubbed it Clause 9. I read the words out loud to the empty room, letting the legal phrasing wash over me like poetry. In the event of a voluntary exit by a spouse from the primary marital residence, demonstrating clear intent to dissolve the marital union, all shared asset claims are immediately subject to absolute forfeiture. The primary grantor is authorized to initiate total asset isolation. The departing spouse relinquishes all rights to equitable distribution, alimony, and title access. In plain English, if she packed a bag, walked out the door, and declared the marriage over, she automatically fired herself from my life and my bank accounts. She did not need a judge to approve it. By signing this document, she had given me the legal authority to financially execute her the moment she decided to betray me. She wanted half of everything. What she did not realize was that everything did not exist in her name anymore. The trap had been set for 7 years. The spring was tightly coiled. All I had to do now was step back and let the steel jaws snap shut. I sat down in my high-backed leather chair and opened my encrypted laptop. It took exactly 14 seconds to boot up. The screen glowed, casting a pale blue light across the dark room. I bypassed the dual-factor authentication and logged directly into my private master server. On the screen, a complex diagram appeared. It looked like a massive, interconnected spiderweb. This was my asset tree. Every single thing we owned was mapped out here, funneled through a labyrinth of limited liability companies, blind trusts, and offshore holding accounts. It was perfectly legal, utterly bulletproof, and completely invisible to anyone who did not possess the master decryption key. I moved the cursor to the top right corner of the screen and clicked a red icon labeled Contingency Protocol Alpha. A prompt appeared, Initiate Spousal Severance? I clicked yes. The screen shifted, bringing up a command console. I watched with deep, quiet satisfaction as the progress bars began to fill up. First, the primary residence. The house we had lived in for a decade. The title was automatically transferred from our joint names into a private holding entity where I was the sole primary grantor. Stella was instantly downgraded from homeowner to an unauthorized third-party occupant. Next, the liquid assets. Our joint checking and savings accounts were drained down to a zero balance, the funds instantly wired into a secured, individual trust account. The beneficiary designations on my massive retirement portfolios were completely scrubbed. Her name vanished from the digital ledgers like dust wiped from a chalkboard. Then came her pride and joy. The luxury SUV I had purchased for her last birthday. I had never put the title in her name. It was registered under a corporate fleet title belonging to one of my shell companies. I initiated the remote lock sequence. As of this exact second, she was driving a stolen company car. Let her try to argue ownership with a vehicle identification number that legally belonged to a commercial entity. The progress bar hit 100%. The screen flashed green. Asset isolation complete. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling a long, slow breath. It was done. Every single element that looked like our shared life had always been exclusively mine, It had just been wrapped in prettier paper to keep her docile. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Inside was a pre-written letter to my attorney, detailing the activation of Clause 9 and instructing him to begin the administrative dissolution of the marriage. I printed out the system logs showing the exact time the asset transfers were completed. I signed the bottom of the letter with my heavy fountain pen. I sealed the envelope, set it squarely in the middle of my desk, and looked at the clock. It was just past midnight. Somewhere across town, Stella was probably opening a bottle of expensive champagne in Preston's apartment, celebrating her grand escape. She was probably toasting to her newfound freedom and the millions of dollars she thought she was about to extract from me. She had absolutely no idea that she was currently sitting there with $0 to her name, no house to return to, and a legal avalanche waiting to crush her at dawn. If you're enjoying this story so far, please take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, leave a comment below with the name of the city you are living in right now. Every single comment helps push this video to a wider audience, and I truly appreciate your support. Now, let us get back to the story. The next morning, I woke up at exactly 6 o'clock, just as I have every day for the past 30 years. I made a pot of black coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. I wasn't looking for news or checking my email. I was waiting for the digital tripwire to snap. During my years as a forensic auditor, I had developed a private social media monitoring tool. Originally, it was meant to track corporate mentions and potential leaks for my clients, but old habits die hard. When I retired, I kept it running, and I had quietly left Stella's public profiles on the watch list. There it was. A notification pinged at 6:32 a.m. Stella had posted a photo. I clicked the link. It was a high-resolution selfie of her and Preston. They were leaning in close, their faces flushed with what I assumed was a mix of expensive alcohol and the high of a successful betrayal. They were holding crystal champagne flutes, the bubbles still rising. Preston had his arms slung around her shoulders like he had just won a trophy at a county fair. The caption read, "Real love always finds its way back home. Finally free from the cage. Cheers to new beginnings. Hashtag finally free, hashtag new life, hashtag soulmates." I stared at the image for a full minute. I didn't feel a sting of jealousy. I didn't feel the urge to throw my coffee mug at the wall. Instead, I felt a surge of professional satisfaction. I looked closely at the details of the photo. I saw the brand of the champagne, the specific lighting in the background of Preston's overpriced condo, and the smug, self-satisfied look on their faces. But most importantly, I looked at the timestamp. The post had gone live at 9:27 a.m. yesterday morning. That was 3 hours before our anniversary dinner. That was while I was at the local florist picking up the 24 long-stemmed red roses that Stella had pretended to admire before she gutted me between bites of salmon. She had taken that photo, toasted to her freedom, and celebrated my downfall before she had even looked me in the eye and told me the marriage was over. She had spent the entire anniversary dinner playing a role, pretending to be a wife for one last meal, all while the digital evidence of her exit was already sitting in her camera roll, waiting for the right moment to be broadcast to the world. In her mind, that photo was a victory lap. In my world, that photo was a legal landmine. She had just provided the one thing every forensic auditor dreams of, a time-stamped confession of premeditated intent. I opened my professional forensic toolkit and downloaded the original image from the social media server. Within seconds, I was looking at the full EXIF metadata. It was all there. The GPS coordinates of Preston's apartment. The exact device model. The very phone I paid the monthly service bill for. And most crucially, the original capture time. The metadata confirmed it was taken at 9:27 a.m. yesterday morning. I navigated back to my asset tree and opened the digital copy of the postnup. I scrolled down to page 15, section 4, subsection 9b. This was the premeditation and fraudulent intent clause. It stated that if evidence emerged showing a spouse had committed to exiting the marriage, including establishing a secondary residence or entering a romantic engagement, prior to formally informing the other spouse, They forfeited any claim to even the most basic joint assets. Why was this in there? Because 7 years ago, my attorney had asked me a single, cynical question: what if she stays for another decade just to wait for you to get richer, while she's already living a double life? So, we wrote the clause. It was designed to catch someone exactly like Stella, someone who thought they could play both sides of the fence until the check cleared. I began a screen recording of the post, the comments, and the metadata report. I captured a specific comment from her best friend, Monica. Monica had written, "Finally. I told you he would come back for you. So glad you guys decided this yesterday morning." Stella had replied with a shushing face emoji and a line that read, "LOL, do not expose me yet. I still have one more dinner to get through." I actually laughed. It was a cold, dry sound that echoed in the empty kitchen. She had documented her own fraud and then joked about it with her co-conspirator on a public platform. I uploaded the entire evidence bundle, the photo, the metadata, the screenshots of the comments, and the metadata report, into my secured legal portal. I labeled it Exhibit A, violation of Clause 9b. The legal structure I had built was no longer just a passive shield to protect my retirement. It had just evolved into an active, high-velocity weapon. Stella thought she was sipping champagne to celebrate her future. She didn't realize she was sipping a toast to her own financial execution. At precisely 11 o'clock that morning, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number with a downtown area code. I knew exactly who it was. "This is Nolan," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Mr. Nolan, my name is Donovan," the voice on the other end said. He sounded young, probably in his late 20s, with that particular brand of polished, law school arrogance that suggests he spends more time on his hair than his case files. "I have been retained by your wife, Stella. I am reaching out as a professional courtesy before we move forward with the formal divorce filings." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "A professional courtesy. How kind of you, Donovan." "Look," he continued, his tone dripping with condescension. "My client is entitled to an equitable division of all marital assets. We are talking about the primary residence, the retirement portfolios, and the vehicles. We would like to keep this civil. If you have counsel, please have them contact me, but I thought we could settle the basics quickly." He talked to me like I was a confused retiree who was about to be steamrolled by the modern legal system. He assumed I was caught off guard. He assumed I was scared. "Donovan," I said quietly, "I am going to send you an email. It has a single attachment. I suggest you open it before you speak another word to me or to your client." I hit the send button on the draft I had prepared 10 minutes earlier. The subject line was Nolan versus Stella, Preliminary Asset Isolation Report. The line went silent for a moment. I could hear the faint click of a mouse on the other end. Then I heard the sound of a man inhaling sharply. What is this?" Donovan's voice had lost its polished edge. It was now thin and tight. "That is a fully executed, notarized postnuptial agreement," I replied, along with a time-stamped evidence bundle showing a direct violation of Clause 9 and Clause 9b. "As of midnight last night, the marital estate you are referring to no longer exists. My client, which is me, has already initiated total asset isolation based on the triggers your client activated yesterday morning at 9:27 a.m. I need to review this," Donovan stammered. "My client didn't mention any postnup. She said everything was joint." "She wouldn't have mentioned it because she never bothered to read it," I said. "And Donovan? One more thing. If you try to file for an equitable split, I will personally file a motion for sanctions against your firm for failing to conduct due diligence on your client's fraudulent claims. Read page 14. Have a productive afternoon." I hung up. I didn't need to hear his response. I could already imagine the look on his face as he realized he had just stepped onto a legal landmine while holding the hand of a woman who was about to become his biggest liability. While I was having my polite conversation with Donovan, Stella was busy attempting to execute her own plan. I know exactly how it went because Wallace, the branch manager at our local bank and a man I had played golf with for a decade, called me later that afternoon to give me the play-by-play. Stella had walked into the bank at 10:45 a.m. Wallace said she looked like she was heading to a photo shoot, oversized sunglasses, a new designer bag, and a smile that suggested she had already won the lottery. She walked up to the teller and demanded a withdrawal of $100,000 from our joint high-yield savings account to be transferred into a new individual account in her name only. The teller, a young woman who had seen Stella in the branch dozens of times, typed into the computer and then froze. She looked at the screen, then at Stella, then back at the screen. "I am sorry, Mrs. Nolan," the teller said, her voice wavering. "I am not seeing your name on this account." Stella's smile vanished instantly. "Excuse me? Check again. We have banked here for 15 years. I was in here last month." The teller didn't argue. She signaled for Wallace. Wallace came out of his office, his face set in a polite, professional mask. He invited Stella into his private office and closed the door. "Wallace, what is going on with your staff?" Stella snapped, sitting down and crossing her legs. "They are telling me I am not on the account." Wallace sighed and opened a folder on his desk. "Stella, I received a notarized directive late last night. It was triggered by a specific clause in your marital contract, the one you signed back in 2017. He slid the document across the desk. It was the beneficiary reassignment form. It showed that as of 12 o'clock midnight, her access to all joint funds had been revoked based on the marital abandonment trigger. "This is a mistake," Stella screamed, her voice rising so loud it could be heard through the glass walls. "Nolan can't do this. I am his wife." "The document says was Stella," Wallace said quietly, pointing to the line where her signature was clearly visible. "You signed this 7 years ago. Our notary was the witness. You joked about it at the time, remember? You said Nolan was being his usual obsessive self." Stella stared at the paper like it was a poisonous snake. The reality of the situation finally started to seep through her delusions. She didn't have $100,000. She didn't have $10,000. She had exactly $0 in her pocket and a designer bag she couldn't afford to pay the credit card bill on. She stood up so fast her chair nearly tipped over. She didn't say goodbye. She stormed out of the bank, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury and growing panic. Wallace called me 5 minutes later. "Nolan," he said. "She just left." She looked like she was about to explode. "I followed the protocol to the letter." "Thanks, Wallace," I said. "I owe you a round of golf." "You owe me a lot more than that, buddy," he laughed. That was the most intense 10 minutes of my week. By the afternoon of day 4, Stella's new life was officially hitting a wall. She had been staying at Preston's condo, convinced that they were about to embark on a life of luxury funded by my hard-earned retirement. I know this because I am the one who owns the building. Preston lived in a high-end development downtown called the Meridian. He thought he was renting from a large, faceless property management group called Westbridge Realty. What he didn't know, because he never looked past the first page of his lease, was that Westbridge was a subsidiary of a holding company called Hollowmark Properties. And Hollowmark was the primary asset inside my private marital trust. I had been Preston's landlord for 3 years. I had kept him there on a month-to-month lease, like a bug in a jar, just in case Stella ever decided to go back to him. At 2:00 p.m., a representative from Hollowmark arrived at the condo. He didn't knock. He just taped a bright yellow notice to the front door and walked away. Stella found it when she returned from a disastrous lunch with Monica, who had suddenly realized that being associated with Stella might be bad for her brand now that the money was gone. The notice was simple: lease terminated. Vacate within 48 hours. Stella's brain stalled. She ripped the paper down and called the number at the bottom. "This is a mistake," she screamed into the phone. "I live here. Preston Marlowe lives here. We have a lease." "Ma'am," the voice on the other end said, cool and professional. "The primary tenant, Mr. Marlowe, is on a discretionary lease agreement. Hollowmark Properties has exercised its right to terminate the agreement effective immediately. All fees have been waived, but the unit must be vacated." "Who the hell is Hollowmark?" Stella shrieked. "I cannot disclose internal ownership, ma'am," the voice said before hanging up. Stella's eyes dropped to the bottom corner of the notice. There, in a tiny, stylized watermark, was a logo. An N and an W inside a perfect square. It was the same logo I used for my personal stationery. The door opened behind her. Preston stepped out, looking like he had just woken up from a nap, wearing a silk robe I probably paid for. "Babe, what is the noise?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. Stella shoved the paper into his chest. "Did you know Nolan owns this building?" Preston scanned the paper, his face turning a sickly shade of gray as he realized the boring old man he had been mocking was actually the person who held the keys to his front door. He can't do that," Preston muttered, but he didn't sound convinced. He didn't offer Stella a hug. He didn't tell her it would be okay. He just turned around and walked back into the kitchen, his eyes already darting toward his laptop. He was a predator, and he could smell a sinking ship from a mile away. Stella stood on the doorstep, realizing for the first time that her safe space was just another room in my house. On day 5, the final pillar of Stella's world collapsed. She did the one thing I knew she would eventually do. She tried to use our daughter as a human shield. Hazel called me at 7 o'clock that evening. Her voice was cautious, but I could hear the underlying exhaustion. "Dad," she said, "I just spent 2 hours on the phone with Mom. She is hysterical." "I imagine she is, Hazel," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "She says you froze everything," Hazel whispered. "She says you have been planning this for years, that you are trying to ruin her life, that you have gone insane. She's staying in a motel because she says she's afraid to come home." I took a deep breath. I didn't want to do this, but the time for protection was over. "Hazel, I am not going to argue with your mother," I said. "I want you to do something for me. Do you remember the cloud folder I shared with you when you turned 18? The one labeled estate planning." "Yeah," she said. "I never really looked at it. It seemed like too much legal stuff." "I want you to open it now," I said. "Look for a document called Contingency Rider. Read section 12. Then I want you to go to your mother's Facebook page and look at the photo she posted 4 days ago. Look at the timestamp, and then check your own text logs from that morning." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of her typing on a laptop. "Oh my God," she finally whispered. "And Hazel? One more thing. If you want the truth, just look at the texts she sent you last summer when she told you I was too busy with work to come to your awards ceremony. Then look at the bank statements in that folder from that same weekend." I had documented everything. Every lie she told Hazel to make me look like the absent father. Every penny she had diverted from Hazel's college fund that I had to secretly replace. An hour later, Hazel sent me a single email from her university account. The subject line was, "I read it all." Attached were 3 screenshots from her mother's phone that Stella had accidentally synced to Hazel's old iPad years ago. They were texts between Stella and Preston from 6 months back. One text from Stella read, "I am so tired of pretending with Nolan. I think I can make him sign a revision to the property deed if I catch him tired enough. Then we are set for life." Another read, "If he dies first, everything goes to Hazel, which is fine. I can manipulate her into sharing it anyway. She's soft like him." I didn't reply to the email. I didn't need to. Hazel had seen the woman behind the mask. Stella called Hazel 9 times that night. Hazel didn't pick up. The next morning, Hazel changed her voicemail greeting. "Hi, you have reached Hazel Nolan," she said. She had dropped the Lane middle name Stella had tried to force on her for years. She was a Nolan. She had chosen the man who never lied to her over the mother who treated her like a future paycheck. Stella had lost her daughter, and that was a debt no amount of money could ever repay. By the end of the first week, Preston Marlowe realized that the payday he had been expecting was actually a death sentence for his lifestyle. On day 7, a process server arrived at Preston's new, much smaller apartment. Preston opened the door and was handed a thick, cream-colored envelope. Inside was a civil lawsuit filed in Superior Court. The plaintiff, Nolan. The claims, intentional interference with the fiduciary asset structure and constructive fraud. I wasn't just suing Stella, I was suing Preston for his role in conspiring to defraud my estate. I had the texts. I had the lease agreement he signed with a forged signature that Stella had provided. The lawsuit was for $350,000 in damages, the exact amount Stella had diverted to him over the last 7 years in secret loans. Preston's lawyer told him the truth that night. You can't win this. He has the paper trail. He's not looking for a settlement. He's looking for a precedent. He wants to bankrupt you. Facing total financial ruin, Preston did what he always did. He took the coward's way out. He packed his bags, blocked Stella's number, and vanished in the middle of the night. He didn't love Stella. He loved the life he thought she could provide. Without the money, she was just an aging woman with a lot of baggage and a very angry ex-husband. Day 10. Stella requested a final meeting. She said she wanted closure. I knew she just wanted an audience for one last performance. We met in a neutral conference room downtown. She looked terrible, yesterday's makeup, a cheap cardigan, and eyes that were red from either crying or a lack of sleep. I didn't say a word. I just slid a single manila folder across the walnut table. Inside was the notice of irrevocable dissolution. It was the final administrative act of the trust. Because of the clauses she had triggered, the marriage was legally dissolved within the framework of the private contract we had signed. She read the final line, "All claims to alimony, assets, and estate entitlements are hereby voided." "You can't just erase me," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't erase you, Stella," I said, standing up. "You walked out of the ledger yourself." I just closed the book. I walked out of the room without looking back. I didn't feel a sense of victory. I just felt the quiet, heavy weight of a job finally finished. I gave her 15 years of stability, and she tried to burn it all down for a midlife crisis. I didn't yell, I didn't hit her. I just let the legal system give her exactly what she signed up for. But some people tell me I went too far by making sure she walked away with absolute zero. Am I wrong for letting the trap close on her? Thank you for watching. If you have not subscribed yet, please consider doing so. It helps the channel bring you more stories like this. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video.